Behind a rundown gas station in Montana, 8-year-old Emma shivers in a cardboard box, her paralyzed legs wrapped in newspapers. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. The winter wind cuts through her thin dress like ice through glass. Most people would walk past without a second glance, but Jake Steele Martinez isn't most people. The Hells Angels patch on his leather jacket tells one story. The gentle way he kneels beside Emma tells another. When he sees her hollow eyes and blue lips, something breaks inside this hardened biker who has spent 20 years building walls around his heart. Without a word, Jake wraps Emma in his jacket and lifts her fragile body into his massive arms. As he carries her toward his motorcycle, one question burns in everyone's mind. What happens when the most feared man in 3 counties becomes a little girl's only hope? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake Steele Martinez had earned his reputation the hard way. 20 years with the Hells Angels, 15 of those as the club's enforcer. His knuckles bore the scars of countless bar fights, and his cold stare could silence a room full of hardened criminals. The leather jacket draped around Emma's tiny frame told stories of brotherhood, violence, and a code that most people would never understand. But as he stood in that gas station parking lot, holding this broken child, none of that mattered. The gas station clerk watched through the grimy window, his hand hovering near the phone. Everyone in Glacier Falls knew Jake Martinez. They knew to cross the street when they saw his Harley rumbling down Main Street. They knew that debts to Jake were paid in full, one way or another. Emma's story was written in the dark circles under her eyes and the way her ribs showed through her torn sweater. 8 years old, paralyzed from the waist down since a car accident that claimed both her parents 2 years ago. Bounced between relatives who saw her as a burden, then foster homes that collected government checks but provided little else. 3 weeks ago, she'd aged out of her latest placement when the foster family moved across state lines, leaving her behind like unwanted furniture. The cardboard box behind Murphy's Gas had been her home for 6 days. She'd survived on discarded food from the dumpster and water from a leaky outdoor faucet. The newspapers wrapped around her legs were yesterday's weather report, promising more snow. Jake's massive hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his jacket around her shoulders. At 6'4" and 250 pounds of muscle and tattoos, he was built for intimidation. But Emma's weight in his arms reminded him of holding his sister's baby 20 years ago, before the world had hardened him into something unrecognizable. "What's your name, little one?" His voice came out rougher than intended, gravelly from years of cigarettes and shouting over motorcycle engines. "Emma." The word was barely a whisper, her voice hoarse from cold and dehydration. "I'm Jake. You hungry?" She nodded, too weak for words. The gas station clerk's nervous energy was palpable as Jake pushed through the door, Emma cradled against his chest. The man behind the counter was maybe 25, probably new to town, definitely unprepared for this particular customer. "Sir, is everything okay?" Jake's reputation preceded him everywhere in Glacier Falls. Stories of broken bones and hospital visits, whispers about drug deals and protection rackets. The Hells Angels patch on his back might as well have been a warning label. "Need some food? Soup? If you got it. And milk." Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, but the clerk's hands shook as he pointed toward the small food section. Jake selected items with surprising care. Chicken soup, crackers, chocolate milk, a package of cookies. At the counter, he pulled out a thick roll of cash, peeling off bills without counting. The clerk's eyes widened at the sight of so much money. "Keep the change," Jake muttered, already turning toward the door. Outside, he sat on his motorcycle, Emma still wrapped in his jacket. He opened the soup with a pocket knife, testing the temperature against his wrist like he'd seen mothers do. When he offered her the first spoonful, she hesitated. "It's okay. I ain't gonna hurt you." Something in his voice convinced her. She accepted the soup, and then another spoonful, and another. Color began returning to her pale cheeks. "Where are your people, Emma?" "Don't have any." The words carried a weight no 8-year-old should know. Jake studied her face, seeing something of himself in her hollow expression. He'd been abandoned too, in different ways, handed off between relatives who saw him as a problem to be solved, rather than a child to be loved. The December wind picked up, and Emma shivered despite his jacket. Jake looked at his motorcycle, then at the girl in his arms. The smart thing would be to call social services. Let the system handle her. That's what any reasonable person would do. But Jake Martinez had stopped being reasonable a long time ago. You got somewhere to go tonight? She shook her head. The decision crystallized in that moment, surprising him with its clarity. He'd spent 20 years being exactly what people expected him to be. Maybe it was time to be something else. Well, he said, adjusting his grip on her slight frame. I guess you do now. The Glacier Falls Medical Clinic sat on the edge of town like an afterthought, its faded brick exterior and flickering neon sign reflecting the community's reluctant relationship with healthcare. Dr. Sarah Chen had been running the clinic for 5 years, serving a population that included ranchers, drifters, and the occasional Hell's Angel who needed patching up after a disagreement. She'd treated Jake Martinez twice before. Once for a knife wound he claimed came from falling on something sharp, and another time for knuckles split so badly she could see bone. Both visits had been conducted in tense silence, with Jake paying in cash and leaving without follow-up appointments. So when he walked through her door carrying a small girl wrapped in his leather jacket, Dr. Chen felt her world tilt slightly off its axis. She needs help, Jake said simply, settling Emma onto the examination table with surprising gentleness. Dr. Chen's medical training kicked in, overriding her surprise. One look at Emma told her everything she needed to know about neglect and malnutrition. The girl's skin had the translucent quality that came from chronic hunger, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone much older. How long has she been without proper care? Dr. Chen asked, beginning her examination. Don't know. Found her behind Murphy's Gas about an hour ago. As Dr. Chen worked, she discovered the faded hospital bracelet around Emma's wrist. The plastic was worn smooth, the text barely legible, but she could make out key information. Emma Catherine Morrison, D.O.B., March 15th, Paralyzed T12L, 1 complete. Guardian contact illegible. Emma, can you tell me about this bracelet? Emma's voice was barely audible. From the hospital, after the accident. What accident, sweetheart? Car crash. Mommy and Daddy died. The simple statement hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Chen glanced at Jake, whose jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. The examination revealed what Dr. Chen had suspected: severe dehydration, malnutrition, and signs of prolonged exposure to cold. Emma's paralysis appeared to be the result of spinal cord damage, and without proper medical care, complications had developed. Pressure sores on her tailbone, muscle atrophy in her legs, and the beginning stages of kidney problems. She needs to be hospitalized, Dr. Chen said quietly to Jake. The dehydration alone could be life-threatening. What about after? Where does she go? Dr. Chen pulled up Emma's records on her computer. What little existed. The trail went cold 3 weeks ago, when her last foster placement had been terminated. Legally, I have to call social services. A child in this condition, found in these circumstances. Jake's hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. Do what you gotta do. While Dr. Chen made the necessary calls, Jake sat beside Emma's examination table. She was receiving IV fluids, color slowly returning to her cheeks. But her eyes remained fixed on him, with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Are you gonna leave me too? She asked. The question hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. In her voice, he heard echoes of his own childhood, the succession of relatives who'd passed him around like an unwanted obligation. The foster homes where he'd learned that survival meant never trusting anyone completely. I ain't going nowhere right now, he said, which was the most honest answer he could give. Social worker Margaret Williams arrived 30 minutes later, a tired woman in her 50s who'd seen too many cases like Emma's. She questioned Jake with professional skepticism, clearly puzzled by the situation. Hell's Angels weren't typically involved in child rescue operations. Mr. Martinez, you understand this is highly unusual. What exactly is your relationship to this child? Don't have one. Found her, brought her here. That's it. But it wasn't it, and everyone in the room knew it. The way Jake's eyes never left Emma, the careful way he'd arranged the blanket around her shoulders, the controlled fury in his voice when he spoke about finding her behind a gas station. We'll need to place her in emergency foster care while we sort this out, Mrs. Williams explained. Given her medical needs, it might take some time to find an appropriate home. Emma's hand shot out, grasping Jake's leather jacket with surprising strength. "Don't make me go with strangers again, please." Mrs. Williams looked between Jake and Emma, professional protocol warring with practical reality. Emergency placements were limited, especially for a child with Emma's medical needs. "Mr. Martinez, would you be willing to undergo a background check for temporary placement consideration?" Jake almost laughed. His background check would read like a criminal's greatest hits. "Lady, you really want to know what my background looks like? Honestly, right now I want to know what your intentions are." Jake's trailer sat on 5 acres of scrubland outside Glacier Falls, the kind of place where a man could live without neighbors asking questions. The double-wide had seen better decades, but it was clean and functional. More importantly, it was his. Emma had fallen asleep in his arms during the ride from the clinic, her small body finally succumbing to exhaustion once she felt safe. Jake had modified his motorcycle helmet, patting the inside with foam he'd torn from an old couch cushion, securing it gently on her head before the ride home. Now, standing in his living room with this sleeping child, Jake felt completely out of his depth. His trailer was designed for a man who lived alone and liked it that way. Beer in the fridge, a television that only got 3 channels, and furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than comfort. The spare bedroom had been serving as storage for 20 years, motorcycle parts, boxes of documents he'd never sorted, and a collection of weapons that would need immediate relocation. Jake laid Emma on his own bed while he cleared the room, working as quietly as possible. Each box he moved revealed another layer of his life. Photos from his early days with the club, when violence had seemed like freedom rather than a cage. Letters from his sister before she'd stopped writing. A high school diploma he'd earned in prison, the one achievement his mother had been proud of before the overdose claimed her. By midnight, he'd transformed the room into something that might pass for a child's bedroom. The bed was a mattress on the floor, covered with the cleanest sheets he could find. He'd rigged a small lamp for reading and moved his old radio onto a makeshift nightstand. Emma stirred when he carried her to the new room, her eyes opening as he settled her onto the mattress. "Where are we?" "My place. You're safe here." She looked around the sparse room, taking in the bare walls and minimal furniture. To Jake, it looked pathetically inadequate. To Emma, who'd been sleeping in cardboard, it looked like a palace. "Can I really stay? For tonight, anyway." Emma's relief was palpable. She closed her eyes again, but her hand remained tangled in the edge of Jake's jacket, as if holding on to the only security she'd known in weeks. Jake spent the rest of the night in his kitchen, researching on his laptop. He'd never owned a computer until 3 years ago, when the club's business had required him to learn basic internet skills. Now he found himself Googling caring for paralyzed children and emergency foster care requirements. The information was overwhelming. Emma would need specialized equipment, regular medical care, physical therapy, and educational support. The financial requirements alone were staggering. Jake's income from the club was substantial, but irregular, tied to activities that wouldn't pass scrutiny from social services. At dawn, he called Tommy Rodriguez, his closest friend in the club and the only member with children. "Steele, man, it's 5 in the morning. Need advice about kids." There was a long pause. "You drunk? Hit your head?" Jake explained the situation in sparse sentences, leaving out the emotional complexity of his attachment to Emma. Tommy listened without interruption, which was unusual for a man who typically had opinions about everything. "Shit, brother. You sure about this? Already called social services. Background check's gonna happen whether I want it or not. Club's not gonna like this. You know that, right? Having a kid around complicates things." Jake had been dreading this conversation since yesterday. The Hells Angels operated on loyalty and secrecy. A child in the mix created vulnerabilities that the club leadership wouldn't tolerate. "I know. Gotta ask, Steele. What's this really about? You've walked past plenty of strays over the years." Jake couldn't answer that question, not even to himself. Something about Emma's hollow eyes and quiet strength had reached past every defense he'd built. Maybe it was recognition of his own abandoned childhood. Maybe it was the simple fact that she'd trusted him when she had no reason to trust anyone. She got nowhere else to go. "And you got nowhere else to be?" "Guess not." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving slowly in the wheelchair Jake had found in his shed. It had belonged to his grandmother years ago, and though it was old and squeaked with every rotation, it gave Emma mobility she hadn't had in weeks. "I made coffee," Jake said awkwardly. "You want breakfast?" Emma nodded, settling herself at his small kitchen table. Jake scrambled eggs with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb, hyper-aware that this simple domestic act was changing something fundamental about his life. The Rusty Spoke was more than a bar. It was the unofficial headquarters of the Hells Angels Glacier Falls chapter, a place where brotherhood was forged in beer and settled with fists. The meeting room in the back had seen decisions that changed lives and ended others. Tonight, it was packed with 12 members, their leather vests bearing patches that told stories of violence and loyalty. Jake sat at the scarred wooden table, the club's gavel resting in front of chapter president Mike "Reaper" Sullivan. At 58, Reaper had been running the chapter for 15 years, with the kind of iron discipline that kept them profitable and out of federal prison. "So, let me get this straight," Reaper said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute leadership. "You picked up some crippled kid and brought her to your place?" "That's right, without talking to anybody, without thinking about what this means for the club." Jake's jaw tightened. Kid was dying. Didn't seem like the kind of decision that needed a committee. Laughter rippled around the table, but it wasn't friendly. Danny, Psycho, Morrison, Jake's least favorite club brother, leaned forward with a predatory grin. "What's next, Steele? You gonna start volunteering at the church? Maybe coach Little League?" "Maybe I will." The room went dead silent. In 20 years with the club, Jake had never challenged the group's fundamental identity. They weren't good guys. They didn't save people. They were outlaws who lived outside society's rules and profited from its weaknesses. Reaper picked up the gavel, a piece of carved oak that had been used to maintain order in this room for decades. "You know what our problem is, Steele? We got a business to run. We got enemies watching for any sign of weakness. And now we got social services sniffing around one of our members. Background check won't find anything that isn't already known. That's not the point. The point is heat, attention, questions we don't need answered." Tommy Rodriguez spoke up from the end of the table. "Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Steele's been our enforcer for 15 years. Man's earned some loyalty." "Loyalty don't pay bills," Psycho interjected. "And it sure as hell don't keep the feds off our backs." Jake stood slowly, his hands flat on the table. "You saying I'm out?" Reaper studied him for a long moment. The two men had history going back to Jake's first day with the club, when he'd proven himself by taking a beating from 3 prospects without backing down. "I'm saying you got a choice to make. The kid or the club. Can't have both." "Why not?" "Because this life ain't compatible with being somebody's daddy. You think you can run collection routes with an 8-year-old in the sidecar? You think you can handle club business when you're worried about getting home for bedtime stories?" Jake had been asking himself the same questions since yesterday. The club had been his family, his identity, his entire world for 2 decades. These men had bled with him, fought beside him, and trusted him with their lives and their secrets. But none of them had held Emma while she cried for parents who weren't coming back. "What if I keep things separate?" "Don't work that way," Reaper said. "You know it don't. First time we need you for something and you can't deliver because of that kid, trust starts breaking down. Can't run a club on maybe." The room waited. 12 men who'd seen Jake break bones and collect debts without hesitation, watching him wrestle with a decision that would define the rest of his life. "How long do I have?" "End of the week. Get the kid placed somewhere else. Or turn in your patch." Jake nodded slowly, understanding the finality in Reaper's voice. The club wasn't a democracy. When the president made a decision, it stood. "Meeting's over," Reaper announced, bringing the gavel down with authority. As the room emptied, Tommy approached Jake near the door. "You really gonna give up 20 years for a kid you met yesterday?" Jake thought about Emma's question that morning. "Are you gonna leave me too?" He thought about the trust in her eyes when she'd fallen asleep holding his jacket. He thought about the man he'd been before yesterday and the man he was becoming. "Yeah, I think I am. Club's been your whole life, brother. Maybe it's time for a new life." Tommy clasped his shoulder. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Gonna be hell giving up your patch, though." Jake looked around the bar one more time, seeing it through different eyes. The fights, the brotherhood, the easy certainty of belonging to something bigger than himself. All of it felt suddenly distant, like memories from someone else's life. Some things are worth more than a patch. The Goodwill store in Glacier Falls smelled like mothballs and broken dreams, but it was the only place Jake could afford to outfit Emma properly. He pushed her through the narrow aisles in the second-hand wheelchair he'd found in his shed, its wheels squeaking with each revolution. The chair was ancient, probably from the 1980 seconds, with torn vinyl armrests and a footrest that wouldn't adjust. But Jake had spent 3 hours the night before, cleaning every component, oiling the wheels, and patching the seat with duct tape. It wasn't perfect, but it gave Emma mobility she hadn't had in months. "This one's pretty," Emma said, pointing to a pink sweater with only one small hole near the hem. Jake added it to their growing pile. They'd been shopping for 2 hours, and he was learning that caring for a child required an overwhelming amount of supplies. Clothes in her size, which was smaller than normal 8-year-olds due to malnutrition, blankets that could be washed frequently, underwear and socks that actually fit. The wheelchair drew stares from other shoppers. Some looked at Emma with pity, others with the uncomfortable avoidance people showed when confronted with disability. Jake found himself cataloging each reaction, filing away faces of people who made Emma feel unwelcome. At the pharmacy section, he studied bottles of children's vitamins and calcium supplements, trying to decode medical recommendations he didn't understand. Dr. Chen had given him a list of nutritional requirements, but the terminology might as well have been written in Sanskrit. "Excuse me?" A woman's voice interrupted his confusion. She was maybe 40, wearing nurse's scrubs and a kind expression. "I couldn't help noticing you're looking at children's supplements." Jake tensed automatically. Strangers offering help usually wanted something in return. "Yeah, trying to figure out what she needs." The woman glanced at Emma, who was quietly examining a picture book. "I'm Linda Peterson, pediatric nurse at the clinic. Dr. Chen mentioned you might have questions about Emma's care. You know about Emma, small town, word gets around." Linda's tone was gentle, non-judgmental. "Dr. Chen asked me to keep an eye out for you two. Emma's case is complicated." Jake waited for the other shoe to drop. The lecture about how an ex-con biker wasn't suitable guardian material for a disabled child. Instead, Linda knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" "Better. Jake made me pancakes this morning." "That sounds wonderful. Jake, could I show you a few things that might help?" For the next 30 minutes, Linda guided them through practical necessities Jake never would have considered. Cushions to prevent pressure sores, shower equipment to help with bathing, nutritional supplements specifically formulated for children with limited mobility. "The state program can help with some of these costs," Linda explained quietly, "but the paperwork takes time, and Emma needs support now." Jake pulled out his roll of cash, peeling off bills without counting. "What's it gonna cost?" "You don't have to do this all at once." "What's it gonna cost?" Linda calculated quickly. "About $400 for the essentials." Jake handed her $500 bills. "Get whatever else she needs." Later, loading packages into his truck, Jake felt the weight of eyes on them. Across the parking lot, 3 women stood beside a minivan, their conversation pausing as they watched him secure Emma's wheelchair in the truck bed. One of them approached, her expression a mixture of concern and suspicion. "Excuse me, are you Emma's father?" "Something like that. It's just, well, we've heard some things about your background." Jake's hands stilled on the wheelchair straps. "What kind of things?" "People are saying you're with that motorcycle gang. The Hells Angels." Emma was listening from the truck's passenger seat, her small face pressed against the window. Jake chose his words carefully. "People say a lot of things. Most of them ain't true, but some of them are." Jake straightened to his full height, and the woman took an involuntary step backward. For 20 years, his reputation had been a weapon he wielded with precision. Now it felt like a liability threatening the one thing that mattered. "Lady, I found a kid dying behind a gas station. I got her medical care, gave her a safe place to sleep, and I'm making sure she has what she needs. You got a problem with that?" The woman's companions had moved closer, forming a small semicircle of maternal judgment. "We're just concerned about what's best for Emma." "Then you should be thanking me instead of interrogating me." Jake finished securing the wheelchair and climbed into his truck. Through the window, he could see the women still talking, probably planning their next move. Phone calls to social services, complaints about unsuitable guardians. Are they mad at us? Emma asked as they drove away. Jake looked at her in the rearview mirror. This small girl who trusted him completely, despite every reason not to. Some people don't like things that don't fit in their neat little boxes. What kind of box do we fit in? Jake considered the question seriously. Maybe we don't fit in any box. Maybe that's okay. The blizzard hit Glacier Falls like a freight train, dumping 18 inches of snow in 12 hours and knocking out power to half the county. Jake's trailer lost electricity just after midnight, the old furnace shuddering to a stop with a mechanical wheeze that sounded like a death rattle. Emma woke to the cold seeping through the walls, her breath visible in the sudden darkness. Jake? He was already awake, had been for an hour listening to the wind tear at the trailer's aluminum siding. Right here, kiddo. Power's out, but we're gonna be fine. Jake had lived through Montana winters for 43 years. He knew how to survive when civilization failed. He'd stockpiled firewood, canned goods, and bottled water. What he hadn't prepared for was keeping a paralyzed 8-year-old warm when the temperature inside the trailer was dropping toward freezing. He carried Emma to the living room, where his wood-burning stove could heat the main area. Then he retrieved the hand-knitted blanket from his bedroom closet, a relic from the mother who'd abandoned him at 15. She'd made it during one of her brief attempts at sobriety, her fingers working the yarn with the desperate focus of someone trying to prove she could be a real mother. Jake had kept the blanket for 28 years, even though looking at it reminded him of promises broken and love withdrawn. Now, he wrapped it around Emma's shoulders, and for the first time, the painful memories felt worth preserving. "Tell me about your mom," Emma said, her small hands exploring the blanket's intricate patterns. Jake fed logs into the stove, buying time to figure out how to explain abandonment to a child who'd experienced too much of it already. She wasn't around much, had problems she couldn't fix. Did she love you? The question hit harder than expected. I think she tried to. Wasn't very good at it. Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone who understood complicated love. My mom loved me a lot. She used to sing to me every night before bed, even after the accident, when I couldn't feel my legs anymore. What did she sing? You are my sunshine. She said even when everything else was dark, I was her sunshine. Jake's throat tightened. He'd never been anyone's sunshine. The storm raged for 3 days. Jake kept the fire burning around the clock, melting snow for water and rationing their canned goods. Emma couldn't be left alone near the stove, so they spent hours talking in the flickering firelight. She told him about her parents. Her father had been a high school math teacher who made pancakes shaped like geometric figures. Her mother had worked at the library and knew every children's book ever written. They died instantly in the accident, which Emma said was better because they didn't suffer. Jake told her about growing up in foster care, though he edited out the worst parts. About learning to fight because it was the only way to survive. About joining the Hells Angels because they were the first group that ever wanted him to belong. Are you scared of being alone? Emma asked on the second night. Used to be. Got used to it, I guess. I'm not scared anymore. Not with you here. Jake studied her face in the firelight, this small girl who'd somehow decided he was worth trusting. Why not? Because you don't leave people behind, I can tell. Her certainty was both humbling and terrifying. Jake had left plenty of people behind over the years. Former friends who'd become liabilities. Women who'd wanted more than he could give. His own sister, when staying in touch became too complicated. But looking at Emma, wrapped in his mother's blanket and trusting him completely, Jake realized she was right about one thing. He couldn't leave her behind, even if it cost him everything else. On the third morning, the storm finally broke. Jake dug them out with a shovel, creating a path to his truck through snow that reached Emma's shoulders. The power company estimated another 2 days before electricity would be restored. We could go to a hotel, Jake suggested. Somewhere with heat and hot water. Emma shook her head. I like it here, with the fire and the stories. Even without electricity? My parents and I went camping once, before the accident. We told stories and made s'mores, and Mom said the best adventures happen when you're not comfortable. Jake looked around his cold, dark trailer and tried to see it through Emma's eyes. Not a place of hardship, but an adventure they were sharing. Not a crisis to endure, but a memory they were creating. All right then, we'll stick it out, but tomorrow I'm teaching you how to play poker. Is that legal? Probably not. But neither is half the stuff worth doing. Emma giggled, and the sound filled the trailer with more warmth than any furnace could provide. Margaret Williams sat across from Jake in the sterile conference room at the Department of Social Services. A stack of files between them thick enough to choke a horse. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's discovery, and the state's investigation into Jake's suitability as a guardian had produced enough paperwork to fill a small library. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you. Your background check reads like a criminal justice textbook. Jake had expected this. 20 years with the Hells Angels didn't exactly scream father material to government bureaucrats. Most of it's old. Assault charges dating back to 1998. Drug possession. Weapons violations. A 2-year stint in state prison. Margaret flipped through pages with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many hard cases. The most recent arrest was only 18 months ago. Bar fight. Charges were dropped. Because the other party declined to press charges. Not because you were innocent. Jake's hands remained steady on the table, but his jaw tightened. You want me to pretend I'm something I'm not? Margaret studied him over her reading glasses. At 53, she'd been a social worker for 27 years. She'd seen every kind of human tragedy and redemption story imaginable. What she hadn't seen was a Hells Angels enforcer applying for emergency custody of a disabled child. What I want is to understand why you're doing this. Kid needed help. Mr. Martinez, there are 12 licensed foster families in this county. 3 of them specialize in children with disabilities. Any one of them could provide Emma with appropriate care. And bounce her around when the checks stop coming? Margaret's expression softened slightly. You've been hurt by the system. System failed me. Ain't gonna let it fail her. What makes you think you won't fail her? Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the question honestly. Maybe I will, but I won't abandon her. That's something, anyway. Margaret pulled out a crumpled photograph, smoothed it carefully on the table. It was Emma's school picture from 2 years ago, taken before the accident. Her smile was radiant, full of the confidence that comes from being loved unconditionally. This is who Emma was before tragedy changed her life. A bright, happy little girl with infinite potential. The question is whether you can help her find that girl again, or if your lifestyle will damage her further. My lifestyle's changing. How so? Jake told her about his decision regarding the Hells Angels, about choosing Emma over the club that had been his family for 2 decades. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. You're willing to give up your entire social structure for a child you've known for 3 weeks? Yes. Why? Jake thought about Emma wrapped in his mother's blanket, trusting him to keep her safe through the blizzard. About her quiet strength and the way she never complained about pain that would have broken grown men. Because she deserves someone who'll choose her first. Margaret opened another file, this one containing reports from Dr. Chen and Linda Peterson. The medical staff speaks highly of your dedication to Emma's care. Dr. Chen says you've attended every appointment, asked intelligent questions, and followed all treatment recommendations precisely. She's got medical needs. I'm learning to meet them. Learning from whom? Internet. Medical books. Mostly from asking questions, until people get tired of answering them. Margaret made another note. What about long-term planning? Emma will need ongoing physical therapy, special educational support, adaptive equipment as she grows. The costs alone will be substantial. Jake pulled out a manila envelope he'd been carrying. Inside were financial statements, employment contracts, and business licenses. He'd spent the last week legitimizing his income sources, transitioning from club-related activities to motorcycle repair and custom fabrication work. Opened a legitimate shop, got contracts with 3 dealerships already, should be enough to cover her needs. You've given this serious thought. More serious than anything in my life. Margaret closed the files and studied Jake carefully. In 27 years of social work, she'd developed an instinct for reading people. Jake Martinez was clearly dangerous, probably violent when provoked, and definitely not the kind of man she'd normally consider as guardian material. He was also completely devoted to Emma's welfare. There are relatives, Margaret said finally. Emma's great-aunt in California expressed interest once she learned about potential insurance settlements from the accident. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Money, most likely. But legally, blood relatives have priority in custody decisions. What about what Emma wants? The court will consider her preferences, given her age and circumstances. But Mr. Martinez, you need to understand the odds you're facing. A single man with a criminal record, seeking custody of a disabled child he has no biological connection to. It's an uphill battle. Jake stood slowly, his decision crystallized. Then I guess we better get started climbing. Mabel's diner had been serving coffee and gossip to Glacier Falls for 43 years. The vinyl booths were cracked, the linoleum was worn thin, and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. It was also the place where Jake and Emma had started eating breakfast every Tuesday and Thursday, partly for the convenience, and partly because Emma loved Mabel's blueberry pancakes. The laminated menu hadn't changed since the Carter administration, offering simple comfort food at prices that reflected small-town economics. Jake had memorized Emma's order within a week: pancakes with extra syrup, chocolate milk, and a side of bacon she'd share with him when she thought he wasn't looking. This morning, their usual booth was occupied by a family of tourists heading to Yellowstone. Mabel Johansson, the 70-year-old owner who'd outlasted 3 husbands and 2 recessions, waved them toward the counter. Your regular table's taken, but these stools should work fine. Jake lifted Emma onto a stool, adjusting the height so she could reach the counter comfortably. The diner was busier than usual, filled with ranchers grabbing breakfast before heading to winter pastures and truckers refueling for long hauls. Morning, Emma, Mabel said, already pouring chocolate milk without being asked. How's that new math book working out? Emma's face lit up. Jake got me the hardest one they had. I'm already on chapter 5. Mabel glanced at Jake with something approaching approval. 3 weeks ago, when word had first spread about the Hell's Angel caring for a disabled child, she'd been skeptical. Motorcycle gangs and children didn't mix in her worldview. But watching Jake patiently help Emma with homework while their food cooled had changed her perspective. And how about you, Jake? Business picking up? Getting there. Fixed Mrs. Henderson's Honda yesterday. Word spreading that I do good work. The bell above the door chimed as Eleanor Pritchard entered with her daughter Susan. Eleanor taught 3rd grade at the elementary school and had been quietly advocating for Emma's educational needs. Susan was a year older than Emma and had been asking her mother about the girl in the wheelchair ever since seeing them at the hardware store. Eleanor approached the counter hesitantly. Good morning, Jake. Emma. Morning, Mrs. Pritchard. I was wondering, Emma, if you'd like to come to school one day this week, just to visit, see if you'd like to join our class. Emma's eyes widened with excitement, then clouded with uncertainty. Would the other kids be okay with my wheelchair? Susan stepped forward, her 9-year-old confidence overriding adult awkwardness. My chair's cooler than anyone else's in class. Nobody else gets to sit in something with wheels. Emma giggled, and Jake felt something tight in his chest loosen. For weeks, he'd worried about Emma's isolation, about her spending too much time alone with a man who barely knew how to talk to children. What do you think, Jake? Emma asked. Can I go to school? Jake looked at Eleanor, reading the genuine kindness in her expression. What would that involve? Just a few hours. I'd introduce Emma to the class, let her participate in some activities, see how she feels about it, and if she wants to stay, we'd work on enrollment. Emma's academically gifted, from what I can tell. She'd probably be ahead of most students her age. At the other end of the counter, Jake noticed 2 men in feed store caps listening to their conversation. One of them, Pete Garrison, owned the largest ranch in the county and had opinions about most things. He'd been drinking coffee and shooting glances in their direction for 10 minutes. Pete cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, but ain't you the guy they're talking about on the news? Jake stiffened. Depends what they're saying. Something about a biker taking in some kid, social services investigating and all. The diner went quiet, conversations pausing as people waited for Jake's response. Emma moved closer to him, instinctively seeking protection. Yeah, that's me. Pete studied them both, his weathered face unreadable. Well, I just wanted to say good for you. Takes guts to step up when a kid needs help. The tension in Jake's shoulders eased slightly. Thanks. My wife and we fostered 6 kids over the years. Hardest thing we ever did, but also the most rewarding. Pete dropped money on the counter for his coffee. You need anything, tools or equipment or whatever, you let me know. Communities gotta stick together. After Pete left, other patrons began approaching. Mrs. Foster, who ran the library, offered to help with Emma's reading. Tom Bailey, the volunteer fire chief, mentioned that his wife taught piano lessons. Even old Joe Murphy, who owned the gas station where Jake had found Emma, stopped by to say he'd been checking the dumpster area every night since, making sure no other children were hiding there. Emma watched this parade of support with wonder. They all want to help? Looks like it, Jake said, equally surprised. Mabel refilled his coffee cup. Small towns take care of their own. You two are part of Glacier Falls now, whether you planned on it or not. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded through 3 addresses before finding Jake's mailbox. The return address read, Morrison Family with a California postmark. And Jake's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope while Emma ate her cereal at the kitchen table. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and filled with the kind of controlled anger that came from years of practice. Mr. Martinez, it began. My name is Patricia Morrison, Emma's great-aunt. I was appalled to learn that my great-niece has been placed with a complete stranger, particularly one with your background. Emma belongs with family, and I will be pursuing immediate custody arrangements. Jake read the letter twice, his coffee growing cold as the implications sank in. He'd known this moment would come, but the reality hit harder than expected. What's that? Emma asked, noticing his expression. Nothing important. Finish your breakfast. But it was everything important. The letter continued for 2 pages, detailing Patricia Morrison's stable marriage, suburban home, and financial resources. It mentioned her research into Jake's criminal history and her shock that the state would place a vulnerable child with a known associate of organized crime. The final paragraph cut deepest. Emma's parents had a substantial life insurance policy, and there will be settlement money from the accident. As her legal guardian, I would ensure these funds are properly managed for her future, rather than squandered by someone seeking to exploit a disabled child for financial gain. Jake folded the letter carefully, his jaw working as he processed the accusation. The woman thought he was after Emma's money. The idea was so foreign to his thinking that he almost laughed. Except nothing about this situation was funny. Jake, you look upset. Just thinking about some business stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. But Emma had learned to read his moods over the past month. Is it about me? Jake studied her serious expression, weighing how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. Remember how we talked about you having relatives in California? Emma nodded slowly. Well, one of them wants you to come live with her. I don't want to live with anyone else. I know, kiddo, but adults don't always get to choose what happens. Emma's lower lip quivered, but she didn't cry. Jake had noticed that about her. She learned early that tears didn't change difficult situations. Would you visit me? California's pretty far away. Then I don't want to go. Jake's phone rang before he could respond. Margaret Williams from Social Services, probably calling about the same letter that had been copied to her office. Mr. Martinez, we need to talk. Can you come in this afternoon? It's about the aunt. Yes, and there are some other developments we need to discuss. 2 hours later, Jake sat in Margaret's office while Emma played in the children's area with a volunteer supervisor. Margaret had additional files spread across her desk, including what appeared to be newspaper clippings and printed internet articles. The Morrison family has hired an attorney, Margaret began. They're questioning the state's decision to place Emma with you, and they're demanding immediate custody transfer. On what grounds? Your criminal background, your association with the Hells Angels, your unmarried status. Margaret paused. And some recent media attention that's complicating matters. She slid a newspaper clipping across the desk. The headline read, Hell's Angel becomes unlikely father figure. The article included a photo of Jake and Emma at Mabel's diner, Emma laughing at something he'd said. I thought this was positive coverage, Jake said, scanning the article. It is, but it's also brought attention to your case. The Morrison family's lawyer is arguing that Emma's placement with you was irregular, that proper procedures weren't followed. Jake felt the walls closing in. What does that mean? It means we're going to court. And Mr. Martinez, I have to be honest with you. The Morrisons have significant advantages. They're married, financially stable, and they're blood relatives. They also don't have criminal records. But Emma doesn't want to go with them. I know, and that matters. But it's not the only consideration. Margaret opened another file, this one containing Jake's financial records and background check updates. There is one positive development. The FBI investigation into Hells Angels activities cleared you of any current criminal involvement. Your business license is legitimate, and your income sources check out. That helps? It helps, but we're still fighting an uphill battle. Jake stared at the newspaper photo, seeing himself through outsiders' eyes. A large tattooed man covered in gang symbols, sitting with a small disabled girl. To someone who didn't know their story, it probably looked suspicious. How long do we have? Preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. Emma will likely be placed in temporary state custody until the matter is resolved. You're taking her away from me? Margaret's expression was sympathetic but firm. It's protocol when custody is disputed. I'm sorry, Jake, but this is bigger than what any of us want now. The Glacier Falls Courthouse was a monument to small-town justice. Built in 1923 with the kind of solid craftsmanship that suggested permanence and authority. Judge Catherine Morrison presided over family court with 30 years of experience and a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense to focus on what actually mattered. Jake sat at the defendant's table with his court-appointed attorney, David Chen, Dr. Sarah, Chen's younger brother who'd agreed to take the case pro bono. Across the aisle, Patricia Morrison sat with her husband Robert and their high-powered attorney from Billings, a woman whose tailored suit probably cost more than Jake's truck. Emma had been placed in temporary foster care 3 days ago, the longest separation she and Jake had experienced since that first night at the gas station. The foster family was kind but temporary, and Emma had cried herself to sleep every night, according to Margaret Williams' reports. Your Honor, Patricia Morrison's attorney began. This case is straightforward. Emma Morrison belongs with blood relatives who can provide stability, resources, and appropriate care for her special needs. Mr. Martinez, while well-intentioned, simply cannot offer what this child requires. Judge Morrison studied the custody documents with the methodical attention of someone who understood that her decisions changed lives forever. Mr. Chen, how does your client respond to these concerns? David Chen stood, adjusting his glasses nervously. At 28, he was young for a family court case of this magnitude, but his genuine care for Emma's welfare was evident. Your Honor, custody decisions should be based on the best interests of the child, not on conventional assumptions about family structure. Mr. Martinez has provided exemplary care for Emma, and she has thrived under his guardianship. The court recognizes Mr. Martinez's good intentions, the opposing attorney interjected, but good intentions don't qualify someone to raise a disabled child. Mrs. Morrison is a registered nurse with experience in pediatric care. She and her husband own their home outright and have established college funds for their grandchildren. Jake watched Emma through the courtroom's side window, where she waited with Margaret Williams. Even from a distance, he could see her anxiety in the way she gripped her wheelchair's armrests. Mr. Martinez, Judge Morrison addressed him directly. You understand the gravity of this situation? Yes, Your Honor. Tell me why you believe you should maintain custody of Emma. Jake stood slowly, acutely aware that everything he'd fought for came down to this moment. The legal documents on his table represented 4 weeks of his life, but Emma represented everything that mattered about his future. Your Honor, I didn't choose Emma because I thought I'd be a good father. I chose her because she needed help, and nobody else was helping. But over these past weeks, she's become my daughter in every way that matters. What makes you qualified to care for a child with significant medical needs? I'm learning. Every day. Dr. Chen has taught me about her medications, her physical therapy requirements, her nutritional needs. I've read every book I could find about spinal cord injuries and child development. The judge made notes as Jake spoke. What about financial support? Caring for Emma will be expensive. I've legitimized my business, secured contracts that will provide steady income. I've also looked into every program and resource available to help with her medical costs. Patricia Morrison's attorney stood again. Your Honor, Mr. Martinez's recent lifestyle changes are commendable, but they're also recent. My clients have been stable, law-abiding citizens their entire adult lives. Mrs. Morrison, the judge addressed Patricia directly. When did you last have contact with Emma before her parents' death? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. We sent Christmas cards, birthday cards, when we remembered. Did you attend the funeral? We couldn't travel at that time. My husband was recovering from surgery. Were you aware of Emma's situation after she was orphaned? We only learned about it recently, when the insurance company contacted us about beneficiary information. Judge Morrison turned to Jake. Mr. Martinez, what do you know about Emma's parents? Her father taught high school math, made pancakes shaped like geometric figures. Her mother worked at the library and knew every children's book ever written. Emma says they loved her completely, even after the accident when everything got harder. How do you know these details? Because Emma tells me stories about them. Every night before bed, she shares a memory. I listen because those memories are precious to her, and what's precious to her is precious to me. The courtroom was quiet except for the scratch of the court reporter's stenography machine. Your Honor, David Chen said, we'd like to call Emma as a witness. She's 8 years old. The opposing attorney objected. She's 8 years old and capable of expressing her preferences, Chen countered. Judge Morrison considered the request. I'll allow it, but with modifications for her age and circumstances. 10 minutes later, Emma wheeled herself to the witness area with the determined expression of someone far older than her years. Spring arrived in Montana like a gentle apology after winter's harsh lesson. Snow melted into streams that carried winter's debris toward the valley, and the first green shoots appeared in Jake's backyard like small promises of renewal. The court had granted temporary custody pending a more thorough investigation, giving Jake 3 months to prove his suitability as Emma's permanent guardian. Emma sat in her wheelchair beside the garden plot Jake had marked out behind his trailer. Packets of vegetable seeds spread across a folding table like colorful possibilities. Her school books lay nearby, homework completed with the methodical precision she brought to everything important. What should we plant first? Jake asked, kneeling in the dark soil that had thawed just enough to work. Emma studied the seed packets with scientific concentration. Tomatoes take longest to grow, so we should start with those. Then peppers, because you like spicy food. Carrots for me, because they're good for my bones. Jake smiled at her practical approach to gardening. Over the past 2 months, Emma had absorbed information like a sponge, reading everything she could find about nutrition, physical therapy, and adaptive gardening techniques. What about flowers? Sunflowers. They're tall enough that I can see them from my chair, and the seeds will feed birds next winter. They worked together in comfortable silence, Jake digging rows while Emma dropped seeds at carefully measured intervals. The physical therapy sessions were paying off. Emma's upper body strength had improved dramatically, and her endurance was nearly normal for a child her age. Dr. Chen had been amazed by Emma's progress, not just physically, but emotionally. The withdrawn, hollow-eyed child Jake had found behind a gas station had transformed into a confident 8-year-old who spoke up in class, made friends easily, and tackled challenges with quiet determination. Jake? Emma said, patting soil over a row of carrot seeds. Mrs. Pritchard wants to skip me ahead to 4th grade next year. How do you feel about that? Scared. But good scared, like when you first brought me home. Jake remembered that night vividly. Emma's terror mixed with desperate hope, her inability to trust warring with her need for safety. She'd slept holding his jacket for 2 weeks, gradually learning that he wouldn't disappear while she slept. What makes you scared about 4th grade? The kids will be bigger. What if they think I'm weird because of my chair? Jake sat back on his heels, considering his response carefully. Emma's disability was a fact of life, not something to be hidden or apologized for. But at 8 years old, she was just beginning to understand how the world saw her. You remember what we talked about when those kids stared at the grocery store? People are uncomfortable with things they don't understand. Right, and what's our job when that happens? Help them understand or ignore them if they don't want to learn. Exactly. Most people, once they get to know you, they forget about the chair pretty quick. You're too interesting for them to focus on wheels and metal. Emma giggled, the sound carrying across the yard like music. You're not supposed to call it wheels and metal. Mrs. Peterson says, I should call it my mobility device. Mrs. Peterson's right about the proper words. But between you and me, it's wheels and metal that happen to be useful. They planted until the sun climbed high enough to make them both thirsty. Jake carried their supplies inside while Emma wheeled herself to the kitchen sink to wash soil from her hands. The phone rang as Jake put away the gardening tools. Margaret Williams' voice carried tension that made his stomach clench. "Jake, we have a problem. Patricia Morrison's attorney has filed a motion claiming that Emma's recent academic acceleration proves she's not receiving appropriate educational support." "What does that mean?" "They're arguing that her intellectual gifts require specialized schooling that only a well-funded family can provide. Private tutors, academic enrichment programs, college preparatory courses." Jake looked at Emma through the kitchen window, watching her examine a butterfly that had landed on her wheelchair. She was explaining something to the butterfly with the same serious concentration she brought to math problems. "Emma's happy at the local school, I know, but the Morrisons are making this about resources and opportunities. They're painting a picture of a gifted child being held back by circumstances. And if we fight it, final custody hearing is scheduled for next month." "Jake, I have to tell you honestly, the academic argument is compelling. Emma is exceptionally bright, and the Morrisons can provide educational opportunities that most families can't afford." Jake felt the familiar weight of inadequacy. The voice in his head that had always whispered he wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. What if they're right? What if I'm holding her back? That's not for me to decide. But I will say this: Emma's test scores have improved dramatically since living with you. Her emotional stability is remarkable. Whatever you're doing, it's working. After hanging up, Jake stood at the kitchen window watching Emma. She'd positioned her chair in a patch of sunlight and was reading, unconsciously mimicking his habit of reading outdoors when weather permitted. "Jake," she called without looking up from her book, "do you think our garden will be pretty?" "I think it's going to be the prettiest garden in Montana." "Good. I want people to see it and know that something beautiful lives here." The emergency medical alert pendant around Emma's neck had been Jake's idea. A small device that could summon help with the press of a button. He'd researched every available option, finally settling on one with GPS tracking and direct connection to emergency services. Emma had initially protested wearing it, claiming it made her feel like an invalid, but Jake's quiet insistence had won out. At 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday in late April, that pendant saved Emma's life. Jake woke to the sound of retching from Emma's room, followed by a weak cry for help. He found her in her bed, pale and struggling to breathe, her body racked with tremors that made her teeth chatter. "Can't breathe right," she whispered. "Feels like my chest is full of rocks." Jake's hands moved automatically, checking her temperature and pulse the way Dr. Chen had taught him. Emma's fever was dangerously high, and her pulse was rapid and irregular. Her breathing was shallow, labored, each inhalation requiring visible effort. "We're going to the hospital," Jake said, already reaching for the phone. "Don't want to go." "I know, kiddo, but this isn't something we can handle at home." The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, EMTs moving with practiced efficiency as they assessed Emma's condition. Jake watched them work, feeling helpless as they loaded her onto a stretcher and started an IV line. "Are you family?" the lead EMT asked. "I'm her guardian. We'll need to verify that at the hospital. For now, you can ride with us." The emergency room at Glacier Falls General was equipped for rural medical crises, but not pediatric emergencies. Dr. Chen met them at the door, her professional composure masking the concern Jake could see in her eyes. "How long has she been symptomatic?" Dr. Chen asked, examining Emma with swift precision. "Started about 20 minutes ago. Sudden onset, high fever, difficulty breathing." Emma's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her fever spiked to 104 degrees, and her oxygen saturation dropped below safe levels. Dr. Chen made the decision to transport her to the Regional Medical Center in Billings, where pediatric specialists could provide advanced care. "What's wrong with her?" Jake asked as they prepared for another ambulance ride. "Possibly pneumonia, but we need to rule out sepsis. Children with spinal cord injuries are at higher risk for serious infections." The helicopter ride to Billings was the longest 30 minutes of Jake's life. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength during moments of lucidity. "Don't leave me," she whispered during one brief awakening. "Never," Jake replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, the pediatric intensivist at Billings General, met them at the helicopter pad. She was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 40, with the focused energy of someone accustomed to fighting for children's lives. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Dr. Hawkins. We've got a room ready for Emma." The pediatric ICU was a maze of monitors, machines, and controlled chaos. Emma was connected to a ventilator to help her breathing, IV antibiotics flowing into her system, as doctors worked to identify the source of her infection. "It's definitely sepsis, Doctor," Hawkins explained during a consultation outside Emma's room. "Her body is fighting a systemic infection, but we're having trouble identifying the bacterial strain." "What does that mean?" "It means we're treating her with broad-spectrum antibiotics while we wait for lab results. The next 24 hours will be critical." Jake spent that night in the chair beside Emma's bed, watching monitors track her vital signs in glowing numbers that rose and fell like electronic prayers. Nurses checked on her every hour, adjusting medications and monitoring her response to treatment. At 3 a.m., Emma opened her eyes for the first time since arriving at the hospital. "Jake? Right here, kiddo. Are you tired?" "I'm fine. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but better than before." Dr. Hawkins appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of voices. She examined Emma quickly, noting improved oxygen levels and decreased fever. "The antibiotics are working," she told Jake. "We're not out of the woods yet, but this is very encouraging." Over the next 2 days, Emma's condition improved steadily. Her fever broke completely, her breathing returned to normal, and her characteristic curiosity reasserted itself. She asked detailed questions about the medical equipment, turning her hospital stay into an impromptu science lesson. "Mr. Martinez." "Doctor," Hawkins said during discharge planning, "I have to tell you, your quick response probably saved Emma's life. Sepsis can progress very rapidly in children with compromised immune systems." Jake felt tears he didn't know he'd been holding back. "She's going to be okay?" "She's going to be fine, but I want you to know, I've seen a lot of parents in crisis situations. The way you advocated for Emma, the knowledge you demonstrated about her medical needs, the obvious devotion you showed. She's lucky to have you." Jake looked at Emma, who was packing her few belongings with the methodical care she brought to everything important. "I'm the lucky one," he said, and meant every word. Emma's first day at Glacier Falls Elementary as an officially enrolled 4th grade student began with Jake helping her organize her backpack at the kitchen table. The school supply list had been longer than expected, but Jake had approached each item with the methodical attention he once reserved for motorcycle repairs. Pencils, check. Notebooks, check. Calculator for advanced math, check. Emma went through her supplies with the systematic approach that had become her trademark. Emergency medication, check. "And your lunch?" "Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, chocolate milk money, and the cookies Mrs. Johansson made special for my first day." The community's response to Emma's enrollment had surprised Jake. Mabel's Diner had provided cookies for Emma's entire class. The hardware store owner had donated adaptive supplies for the classroom. Even old Joe from the gas station had contributed a gift card for school supplies. "You nervous?" Jake asked, adjusting the straps on Emma's backpack. "A little, but good nervous, like starting an adventure." Jake drove Emma to school in his truck, her wheelchair secured in the back. The school had installed a ramp and modified a bathroom to meet accessibility requirements, changes that would benefit other students for years to come. Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard waited at the entrance with several 4th grade students, including Susan, who'd become Emma's closest friend over the past month. "Ready for this, Emma?" Mrs. Pritchard asked. "I've been ready for weeks." Jake watched Emma wheel herself into the classroom, her confidence evident in the way she navigated around desks and introduced herself to new classmates. Several parents lingered in the hallway, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. "Mr. Martinez?" A woman approached him hesitantly. "I'm Carol Jensen, Brady's mom. I just wanted to say how excited Brady is to have Emma in his class." "That's kind of you." "Actually, it's been educational for all of us. Brady's been asking questions about disabilities and differences. Good questions that I probably should have addressed years ago." More parents introduced themselves, sharing similar stories. Emma's presence was challenging their children to think about accessibility, inclusion, and the various ways people navigate the world. "Mr. Martinez," Mrs. Pritchard called him aside. Could we talk privately for a moment? They walked to her empty classroom, where student artwork covered the walls and Emma's desk had been positioned to optimize her participation in group activities. "How is Emma handling the custody situation?" Mrs. Pritchard asked. "I know the final hearing is approaching. She's nervous but trying not to show it. Keeps asking practical questions about what would happen if she had to move to California." "What do you tell her?" "The truth, that I'm fighting to keep her, but courts make decisions based on factors I can't control." Mrs. Pritchard opened a folder containing Emma's academic assessments and work samples. "I wanted you to see these before the hearing. Emma's progress has been remarkable." The paper showed consistent improvement across all subjects, with math scores approaching high school levels. Emma's writing samples revealed emotional maturity beyond her years, often focusing on themes of family, belonging, and overcoming challenges. "She wrote this yesterday," Mrs. Pritchard said, handing Jake a short essay titled, "What Home Means." Jake read Emma's careful handwriting. "Home isn't a place with fancy things or lots of rooms. Home is where someone chooses you every day, even when choosing you is hard. Home is where your wheelchair fits through all the doors and nobody makes you feel different for needing it. Home is where someone learns to braid your hair even though their big hands weren't made for small braids. Home is where someone stays awake all night when you're scared and reads you stories about parents who love their children no matter what." "She's writing about you," Mrs. Pritchard said gently. Jake folded the paper carefully, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. "The other thing I wanted to discuss is Emma's academic future. Her test scores suggest she's capable of more advanced work than we can provide here. The Morrisons mentioned that. Private schools, specialized programs, those opportunities exist, certainly. But Emma's thriving in our inclusive environment. She's learning social skills, developing friendships, and gaining confidence that might be harder to achieve in a high-pressure academic setting. What are you recommending?" "That we develop an individualized education plan that challenges Emma academically while maintaining her social connections. Advanced coursework in math and science. Perhaps some online classes, but keeping her grounded in this community." Jake looked around the classroom, seeing Emma's artwork displayed alongside her classmates, her name on the reading chart, her desk positioned in the friendship circle where she belonged. "Could we make that work? With the right support system? Absolutely. And Mr. Martinez? Emma has the best support system I've seen in 20 years of teaching. You." At pickup time, Emma wheeled herself to Jake's truck with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd had a productive day. "How was it?" Jake asked. "Perfect. Well, mostly perfect. Tommy Sanders said my wheelchair was cheating during races at recess." "What did you say?" "I told him it wasn't cheating. It was adaptive equipment. Then I beat him in a race anyway." Jake laughed, proud of Emma's ability to advocate for herself with humor and confidence. "So you want to go back tomorrow?" "Every day. This is my school now, and these are my people." The restraining order arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked uncomfortable with his assignment. The legal document, bearing official seals and legal language, prohibited Jake from removing Emma from the state of Montana pending the final custody hearing. "You're not in trouble," Deputy Martinez assured him. "This is just standard procedure when custody is disputed across state lines." Jake read the document twice, his coffee growing cold as he processed the implications. Patricia Morrison's attorney had convinced a judge that Jake might flee with Emma to avoid the custody transfer, painting him as a desperate man capable of kidnapping. Emma sat at the kitchen table, pretending to focus on homework while clearly listening to every word. "What does it mean?" she asked after the deputy left. "It means we can't take any trips outside Montana until the judge makes his decision." "Were we planning trips?" Jake hadn't been, but the restriction felt like a cage anyway. "Not really, just means we're staying put for now." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding more than she let on. At 8 years old, she'd learned to read adult tension like weather patterns, predicting storms before they arrived. The phone rang an hour later. Margaret Williams sounded tired, which had become her default tone when discussing Emma's case. "Jake, there's something else. The Morrisons have filed additional motions." "What kind of motions?" "They're requesting immediate custody transfer, claiming that Emma's medical emergency last month demonstrates inadequate supervision." Jake's grip tightened on the phone. That's insane. I got her to the hospital in time. The doctors said my quick response saved her life. I know, but their attorney is arguing that a trained medical professional would have recognized the symptoms earlier, prevented the crisis entirely. Patricia Morrison's a nurse, not a doctor, and she hasn't seen Emma in years. The argument isn't about logic, Jake. It's about creating doubt in the judge's mind about your capabilities. After hanging up, Jake found Emma in the living room, staring out the window at their garden. The vegetables they'd planted together were beginning to sprout. Tiny green shoots pushing through the soil with determined optimism. Jake? Emma's voice was smaller than usual. If I have to go live with my great-aunt, will you forget about me? The question hit him like a physical blow. Jake knelt beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. Emma Catherine Morrison, listen to me very carefully. I will never, ever forget about you. You're part of my heart now, and that doesn't change no matter where you live. But if I'm in California and you're in Montana, then I'll drive to California every chance I get. I'll call you every day. I'll send you letters and pictures of our garden. Emma's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you. I know, kiddo. I'm fighting as hard as I can to make that happen. What if it's not enough? Jake had been asking himself the same question. Despite community support, character witnesses, and evidence of Emma's thriving under his care, the legal system favored conventional family structures and financial stability. Then we'll deal with whatever comes. Together, even if we're apart. That afternoon, Jake called Tommy Rodriguez, his former Hells Angels brother who'd become an unlikely ally in the custody battle. Steele, how you holding up? Been better. The Morrisons are tightening the screws. Listen. There's something you should know. Word's gotten around about your situation. Some of the guys are talking about making this problem disappear permanently. Jake's blood ran cold. Tell them to stay out of this. I already did. But Psycho's got some ideas about California trips, if you know what I mean. Tommy, I need you to hear me clearly. If anyone from the club interferes with this case, it'll destroy any chance Emma and I have. Promise me you'll keep them away. I promise. But Jake? These legal games they're playing? It ain't right. You've been better to that kid than most blood parents. Being right doesn't always win in court. Maybe not. But sometimes being right is enough to change people's minds. That evening, Jake helped Emma with her homework. Their routine unchanged despite the legal storm gathering around them. She was working on a social studies project about community helpers, writing about different jobs that made society function. I'm writing about you, Emma said, showing him her paragraph about motorcycle mechanics. I'm not really a community helper. Yes, you are. You help people fix their bikes so they can get to work and take care of their families. That's helping the community. Jake read her description of his work, seeing his life through her eyes. To Emma, he wasn't an ex-criminal trying to legitimize himself. He was simply a man who fixed things that were broken, including 8-year-old girls who needed someone to choose them. What do you want to be when you grow up? Jake asked. A teacher, like Mrs. Pritchard. But also a mechanic, like you. I want to help fix things that are broken. That's a good goal. Jake, when I grow up, will you teach me to fix motorcycles? If that's what you want to learn, absolutely. Emma smiled. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her in days. Good, because I think fixing things runs in our family. The petition supporting Jake's custody contained 247 signatures, each name representing someone who had witnessed the transformation of both Jake and Emma over the past 4 months. Mabel Johansson had started the initiative, setting up a table at her diner where customers could sign while drinking coffee and sharing stories about the unlikely pair. Never seen anything like it in 40 years of serving this community, Mabel told the reporter from the Glacier Falls Gazette. That little girl brought out something in Jake Martinez that nobody knew existed, and he gave her back her childhood. The petition drive had spread beyond the diner, Dr. Chen's medical office, the elementary school, the hardware store, even the gas station where Jake had first found Emma. Each signature came with a story. Pete Garrison wrote about Jake's mechanical expertise helping local ranchers keep their equipment running. Eleanor Pritchard detailed Emma's academic progress and social development. Tommy Rodriguez provided a character reference that surprised everyone, including himself. Jake Martinez saved my life twice, Tommy's statement read. Once in a bar fight 20 years ago. And once last month when he showed me what real courage looks like. Real courage isn't violence. It's a man choosing to love a child when the whole world says he's not qualified. The signatures represented a cross-section of Glacier Falls that rarely agreed on anything. Conservative ranchers who normally viewed motorcycle gangs with suspicion, liberal schoolteachers who typically advocated for conventional family structures, business owners who cared primarily about community stability. Margaret Williams spread the petition across her desk, studying the names with professional interest. "This is unprecedented," she told Jake during their final meeting before the hearing. "In 27 years, I've never seen community support this unanimous for a non-traditional custody arrangement. Does it matter legally? It demonstrates Emma's integration into the community, your support network, and the stability you've created together. Yes, it matters." Jake looked at the names, recognizing faces from the diner, the school, the repair shop where he'd started building his legitimate business. Each signature represented a small act of faith in his ability to be Emma's father. "There's something else," Margaret continued. The Hells Angels Glacier Falls chapter submitted a formal statement. Jake's stomach tightened. "What kind of statement?" "They're officially supporting your custody application." Reaper himself signed it. The letter from his former club was brief but powerful. Jake Martinez served this brotherhood with honor for 20 years. His decision to choose fatherhood over fraternity represents the highest values we respect. The Hells Angels Glacier Falls chapter unanimously supports his petition for custody of Emma Morrison. "I don't understand," Jake said. "They kicked me out for choosing Emma. Apparently, they've been watching from a distance. Your commitment to Emma, your transformation into a legitimate businessman, your integration into the community. They respect what you've accomplished." That afternoon, Jake attended Emma's school play, where she portrayed a pioneer girl in a fourth-grade production about Montana history. Her wheelchair had been decorated to look like a covered wagon, and she delivered her lines with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. After the performance, parents approached Jake with congratulations and support. Carol Jensen, Brady's mother, introduced her husband. The Peterson family invited Jake and Emma to their daughter's birthday party. The school principal mentioned his own letter of support for the custody hearing. "Mr. Martinez," called a familiar voice. Jake turned to see Reaper approaching, looking oddly formal in civilian clothes rather than his usual leather vest. "Mike, wanted to talk to you before tomorrow's hearing. Can we walk outside?" They stood in the school parking lot, two men who'd shared 20 years of brotherhood trying to navigate unfamiliar territory. "Why the letter?" Jake asked. "Because you did something none of us thought possible. You chose something better than what we offered. Thought you said the club and Emma couldn't coexist. I was wrong. Emma didn't take you away from the brotherhood. She showed you what real brotherhood looks like." Reaper handed Jake a small wrapped package. "From the guys? For Emma." Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with Emma Martinez and a small motorcycle charm. "Martinez? That's the name you gave her in your heart, isn't it? The name you've been thinking since day one?" Jake couldn't deny it. From the moment he'd wrapped Emma in his jacket, she'd been his daughter in every way that mattered. The legal formalities were just catching up to emotional reality. "Thanks, Mike. Don't thank me yet. Thank me after you win tomorrow." That evening, Jake helped Emma practice her testimony for the final hearing. She'd insisted on speaking to the judge directly, despite David Chen's concerns about putting an 8-year-old under legal pressure. "What will you tell the judge about why you want to stay with me?" Jake asked. Emma considered the question seriously. "I'll tell him that home isn't about having the most money or the biggest house. Home is about someone who chooses to love you every single day, even when it's hard." "And if he asks about your great-aunt?" "I'll say I hope she's happy in California, but Montana is where I belong. With you. In our family." Jake looked at this remarkable child who'd somehow decided he was worth loving, despite every reason to doubt him. "What if we lose? Then we'll figure out how to still be family, even if they make us live in different places. But Jake, we're not going to lose." The adoption papers lay spread across Judge Morrison's desk like a map to a new life. 4 months after a Hells Angel found a dying child behind a gas station, the final custody hearing had concluded with a decision that surprised no one except Patricia Morrison and her expensive attorney. "Mr. Martinez," Judge Morrison had said after 3 hours of testimony, This court finds that Emma's best interests are served by remaining in your custody. Furthermore, the court is prepared to approve your petition for formal adoption, if that is your desire. Jake had looked at Emma, seated beside him in her wheelchair, her small hand gripping his with fierce determination. It is your honor, more than anything. Now, 2 weeks later, they sat in David Chen's office signing the final documents that would make their family legally official. Emma insisted on reading every page, asking questions about legal terminology, with the thoroughness she brought to all important matters. "What does irrevocable mean?" she asked, pointing to a paragraph about parental rights. "It means permanent," David explained. "Once these papers are signed, Jake becomes your legal father forever. Nothing can change that." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction. "That's what I wanted." Jake signed his name with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the magnitude of the moment. After 43 years of life lived on the margins, he was officially becoming someone's father. "Congratulations," David said, stamping the final seal. "Emma Martinez, meet your dad, Jake Martinez." Emma grinned at the sound of her new name, Emma Martinez. "I like how that sounds." "Me too, kiddo." The celebration at Mabel's diner that afternoon drew half the town. A banner reading, "Welcome to the family." Emma Martinez hung across the front window, and Mabel had baked a cake decorated with a motorcycle and wheelchairs side by side. Margaret Williams stopped by during the festivities, carrying a final report that would close Emma's case file. "I've been doing this job for 27 years, she told Jake quietly. "I've seen a lot of placements, a lot of families, a lot of children who needed someone to fight for them, but I've never seen anything like what you two have built together. We got lucky." "No, Jake, luck is finding $100 on the sidewalk. What you did was recognize something precious when everyone else saw a problem to be solved. That's not luck, that's character." Emma wheeled herself between the tables, accepting congratulations and small gifts from townspeople who'd watched her transformation from a dying child into a thriving daughter. Her confidence was remarkable, her integration into the community complete. Tommy Rodriguez arrived late, still wearing his Hells Angels vest but carrying a wrapped present with surprising delicacy. "This is from the whole club," he told Emma, handing her a package. Inside was a custom leather jacket, child-sized, with MARTINEZ embroidered across the back and a small patch reading Honorary Member Glacier Falls Chapter. "It's not a real membership," Tommy explained quickly to Jake. "Just a way of saying she's family to us too." Emma tried on the jacket, which fit perfectly over her school clothes. The leather was soft, well-crafted, nothing like the intimidating vests worn by full members. "Do I look tough?" she asked, posing for photos. "You look like Emma," Jake said, "which is the toughest thing anyone can be." Later that evening, after the celebration wound down and the last well-wishers had gone home, Jake and Emma sat in their garden watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and red. The vegetables they'd planted together were thriving, evidence that good things could grow in the most unlikely places. "Jake," Emma said, using the name she'd never stopped calling him despite it being officially Dad now. "Yeah? Do you think my parents would be happy about the adoption?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I think your parents would be grateful that you found someone who loves you as much as they did. Will you tell me stories about them even now that you're my dad?" "Every story you want to hear, as many times as you want to hear them. Your parents will always be part of your history, Emma. I'm just adding new chapters." Emma leaned against his arm, tired from the day's excitement but content in a way that radiated security. "I love you, Jake. I love you too, daughter." The words felt natural, inevitable, like they'd been waiting 4 months to be spoken officially. Emma Martinez and Jake Martinez. Father and daughter by choice rather than blood, but family in every way that mattered. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bearing witness to the newest family in Glacier Falls and the promise that love, once freely given, could transform even the most unlikely circumstances into something beautiful and permanent. "Ready to go inside?" Jake asked. 5 more minutes? I want to remember this day exactly." They sat together in the gathering darkness, a former Hells Angel and his adopted daughter, surrounded by the garden they'd planted and the community that had embraced them both. 1 year after Adoption Day, Jake stood in his expanded motorcycle shop watching Emma explain gear ratios to a customer who'd brought his Harley in for transmission work. At 9 years old, she could diagnose engine problems by sound and had memorized the parts catalogs for 3 major motorcycle manufacturers. "The problem isn't your clutch," Emma told the bewildered customer, her wheelchair positioned beside the lifted bike. "You've got worn synchros in second gear. Dad can fix it, but you'll need new parts." The customer looked from Emma to Jake with amazement. "She knows more about bikes than most mechanics I've met. She's got a gift for it," Jake said, pride evident in his voice. "Emma, why don't you write up the estimate while I talk to Mr. Patterson about timing?" Emma wheeled herself to the office area Jake had modified for her use, her homework spread across a desk that could adjust to accommodate her wheelchair. She balanced schoolwork with shop duties with the efficiency of someone who'd found her place in the world. The shop had grown beyond Jake's expectations. Word of his honest work and fair prices had spread through the motorcycle community, bringing customers from 3 counties. More importantly, Emma's presence had transformed the business into something approaching a family operation. "She's remarkable," Dr. Chen said, arriving for Emma's quarterly medical checkup that Jake now conducted in a back room equipped with basic medical supplies. "Her physical development is excellent, and her intellectual growth continues to astound her teachers. Any concerns?" "None medically. Emotionally, she's one of the most secure children I've encountered. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Emma's integration into the community had become so complete that newcomers assumed she'd been born in Glacier Falls. She played adaptive sports with the regional team, participated in 4-H with a project focused on sustainable gardening, and had been elected class treasurer at school. The garden behind their trailer had evolved into a small farm operation. Emma had researched crop rotation, soil composition, and organic farming techniques with scientific precision. Their vegetables now supplied Mabel's Diner and 2 other local restaurants, providing Emma with her first legitimate income. "Dad," Emma called from the office, "Mrs. Henderson wants to know if we can look at her Honda tomorrow. She's having trouble shifting. Tell her to bring it by after school. You can diagnose it while I finish the Peterson job." The family portrait Jake had commissioned for their first anniversary hung prominently in the shop's waiting area. Professional photographs weren't usually Jake's style, but Emma had insisted they needed official documentation of their family status. In the photo, Jake stood behind Emma's wheelchair, his hands resting on her shoulders, both of them smiling with the comfortable ease of people who belonged exactly where they were. Emma wore her small leather jacket. Jake wore a clean shop shirt, and the photographer had captured something indefinable about the bond between them. "I still can't believe it sometimes," Tommy Rodriguez said, stopping by during his weekly visit. He'd become something like an uncle to Emma, teaching her card games and bringing her books about motorcycle racing. "A year ago, you were collecting debts for the club. Now you're running a legitimate business and raising a kid." "Best year of my life," Jake said simply. "Emma's changed you. We changed each other." That evening, Jake helped Emma with her advanced mathematics homework while dinner cooked on the stove. She was working through calculus problems that challenged his own understanding, part of an accelerated program that kept her academically stimulated while maintaining her social connections. "Dad, I've been thinking about the future," Emma said, solving a complex equation with casual efficiency. "What about it?" "I want to study engineering in college. Specifically, adaptive technology for people with disabilities." "That's a good goal. What kind of adaptive technology?" "Better wheelchairs, more efficient prosthetics, mobility devices that help people do things everyone else takes for granted." Emma paused in her calculations. "I want to help fix things that are broken, like you taught me." Jake looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who'd somehow decided that her disability was simply another engineering problem to be solved. "I think you'll be amazing at that. Will you help me research colleges? I want to start planning early. We'll research every program in the country if that's what you want." Emma smiled, returning to her homework with characteristic focus. Outside, the Montana evening painted their windows with golden light, illuminating a scene of domestic contentment that neither of them had dared imagine 18 months earlier. In the distance, Jake could hear the rumble of motorcycles on the highway, riders heading home to their own families and lives. Once, that sound had represented freedom and belonging. Now it was simply background noise to the more important sounds of Emma's pencil scratching across paper and the quiet hum of a home where love had taken root and flourished. Their story had begun with a cardboard box behind a gas station and a man who chose compassion over indifference. It had become something neither of them could have predicted: a family built on choice, sustained by devotion, and strengthened by the daily decision to keep choosing each other. The little girl who'd been starving had found nourishment. The man who'd been lost had found purpose. Together, they'd discovered that the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest acts of human kindness.